Hello and welcome back. This is kind of just another fun sort of video, to watch. I'm not going to do any real gameplay, just some web swinging. But, with all the stuff going on with coronavirus and whatnot, just, a quick little video for one or two people who might enjoy it. But I thought in this one... Oh, by the way, this is late in the game, so there may be somebody calling or talking to Spider-Man or something that might be a late game spoiler. Just be aware of that. Anyway, I want to talk about kind of what can we do to save comic books, or what can Marvel and DC and whatnot do to save comic books, because comic books aren't doing too well right now. Marvel has just announced two new series being released. One is a redoing of America Chavez, who's really... She was an okay character, but then, a lot of the writing, put a lot of people off. Well, she was an okay character when she was on, I forget what it is. She was on Young Avengers, that's it, Young Avengers, and she was a pretty good character on that. They gave her own series, and the writing just wasn't that good, or at the very least it was off-putting to people. I'll say that. I don't want to disrespect any writers. And, she's been back and forth a few times, but for the most part people just, haven't liked, her since she left the Young Avengers, I should say. And they're doing a new version of the New Warriors, which is, my first thought is, oh, cool, but then they had to make it weird. And most people, regardless of what they think, it's the way they've done the New Warriors was to kind of basically, yeah, pretty much every social justice warrior stereotype you can think of, that's basically what they have done in the design and all that weird stuff. And even people who are social justice warriors are like, yeah, no, we're not liking this. This is more offensive than it is supportive. So, that's kind of where what it looks like and where we're at on that. Okay, I just have to make this comment. So the original New Warriors are going to be in the New Warriors, which is kind of cool. I did enjoy a few of the comics back in the 90s. But, they have new outfits, new designs, new everything. For some reason, they have Night Thrasher's outfit, and I don't think anyone's talking about this because there's so much more to talk about, but Night Thrasher's current outfit, or costume, I should say, makes him look like he's a Mexican wrestler. Honestly, that's what it looks like. It's some really weird design choices go with him, and and I think people aren't talking about it because there's a lot more weird design choices going with all the new versions of the New Warriors. Anyway, so that's kind of where we're at with Marvel Comics, and it seems like they're making a lot of poor decisions about comic books, and it is affecting people. A lot of comic shops are getting stuck with comics that they can't move, and it's just one of those situations where it'd be great if we could get another Stan Lee or another really good comic book writer back to write the good old-fashioned comics that are just really super good, that everybody kind of looks at and goes, okay, it's a bit cheesy, but I like it. We need comics like that more than we need, what we're mostly getting from comic books now. So, I had a few suggestions of what Marvel can do to make comics, just be a lot better than they have been in a while. So first off, and this is actually a very controversial view, I know, because I get a lot of people yelling at me on Twitter every time I do it, but it's a very basic writing aspect, which is the entire focus of a story should be on the story or the characters, and pretty much that's it, or the setting. Story, characters, or setting, depending on what you're basing your story on. Now, good story with good characters and good setting are always ideal, but there are some, you use as a base different things. For example, J.R.R. Tolkien, we'll start with him. The Hobbit was character based. You know, it had a great setting and a great story, but it was very much a character based thing. Whereas Lord of the Rings was very much story based, very much like that. And, you know, different books have different, you know, different writing techniques are done with different books, and it doesn't really, it's not a big deal which one you use. You know, whatever the writer's comfortable with using, it's all good. But in, like, the last, it seems like only 10 years, but it's probably been about 20 years, a lot of focus has stopped being on the three things I said: the story, the characters, or the setting. You know, it stopped being about those things and started to be more about the message that each story wanted to send. So the problem is that when you start a story from a message, it's very hard to get a good story out of it. So that's first and foremost. So that's actually basic writing advice. Never start a story with the message you want to send. Just, you know, start a story with the story, and you know, whatever philosophies or messages you have in your mind will come out in the story. You just have to have confidence that it will. That's very basic. That's a very basic writing advice that, you know, I was given to in a writing class years and years ago. It's just very that simple. Now, you know, there are exceptions, but they are few and far between. So, for example, I use this one a lot just because it's such a great example of writing that was written for a message but still managed to produce a good story. And that's with the 1970s Doctor Who story, The Green Death, which was, they wanted to send a message about pollution, about, you know, corporate greed and pollution, basically. It's a very hippie-ish 60s story in that regard. But it's also a fun story about, you know, giant maggots and, you know, an evil computer that wants to take over the world, and all, you know, all the crazy Doctor Who stuff that, you know, shows up every once in a while in Doctor Who. Now, the reason they were able to start with a message and still create a really good story around it was, one, they already had the setting set up. The Doctor, it was a Jon Pertwee era. That Doctor was already well established. They had a really good setting. It's one of the unit stories, so they already had a very good setting already set up. So they had character and setting. And, you know, the writers actually, instead of just focusing on the political message, actually took time to develop the story. Now, while it's not like the most perfect story you will ever see or anything like that, it's an entertaining, fun story that has, you know, a good message in it about pollution and about, you know, yeah, basically about pollution. That's the main story about it. And that's the thing, is that nowadays you don't get that same sort of level of caring. And like I said, you know, they started with a message and were able to get away with it because they had so much already in place, such as the setting and the character were already in place, and they took the time to set up the story. Or, yes, the story. For a second I thought I said setting. But, you know, writing nowadays, people neglect to do that. They just start with the message, which, for whatever it is in each story, they start with the message, and they don't really focus on telling a good story in the middle of it. And then they don't realize that a lot of people watch stories, read comic books, play video games, whatever medium they're using. They don't realize that people do that a lot, and people who do that want to have a good story. They want to have good escapism. They don't want to have just a message told to them. They want to be able to enjoy the medium. I'm going to use another example, this game, this SpiderMan game. Now, there are a lot of things that I think are kind of political and that I kind of roll my eyes at. A few things I agree with, a few things I don't agree with. For example, there's the monitoring stations, which are all very about, you know, current beliefs about pollution and stuff like that. And, you know, they're pretty good messages. I don't have a problem with the messages so much as the fact that it feels like the solutions are a little too easy. But on the other hand, that's typical video game stuff too. It's like you have to have a good solution somewhere. You have to have the hero get the solution right in it, even if it's not very realistic. So, you know, that's just a personal gripe. But for the most part, it doesn't bother me that they've included these political messages, because it's still a really fun game to play, and it has a really great storyline. And I think that's probably the biggest thing in comics nowadays that they are neglecting to do. They remember the message, they forget to tell a good story surrounding the message. And, you know, Spider-Man is a very good example of kind of how to tell a good story and still, you know, not put people off because of whatever message you might want to be conveying. Now, Stan Lee, when he wrote the original, and he said this, he was always very, very careful that when he would have, you know, he's very careful with whatever with politics, that he was very careful not to put people off in it. He said he wanted everybody to enjoy it, whether they're conservative or liberal or, you know, whatever their political ideology is, whatever their religion is, whatever their personal beliefs are. He wanted to create a story that could be enjoyed by everyone. And he pretty much did that. Now, that's not to say he didn't cover politics in it. There were quite a few political moments in it. I'm trying to remember the number. I want to say somewhere in the 70s. He covered, this was in 1969, he covered, like, the riots on campuses, where protesters would, you know, be protesting, and then there would be consequences because they're protests, and, you know, he covered that. And it actually it's kind of an interesting story, because the way he was able to kind of resolve it without really offending anyone, well, the basis of the story is that the students at a university are protesting the housing situation, that they were basically, there had been a plan that they had wanted this unused portion to be made into housing for, you know, underprivileged students. And the university wasn't doing it, the dean, and they were actively protesting the dean for doing this. And it being a Spider-Man story, you know, it's a robbery takes place, and, you know, the protesters, of course, get blamed, and Spider-Man's caught in the middle, always, and so on. But, you know, it's later shown that the protesters had nothing to do with the robbery, and they're let go. But in an interesting moment of this, the dean shows up and starts talking to them, and we discover that the dean had already planned to basically create the housing situation that they wanted, turn these unused area into housing for the students. He already planned on doing that. That was always part of his plan. He didn't make it public because he needed time to convince the what are they, trustees, I believe, of the university to be able to do that. They weren't on board immediately, so he had to take time to convince them. And of course he hadn't consulted with any students because of that, and the ending was kind of both the protesters saying, oh, well, we didn't realize you were doing this, we should have been, you know, we should have realized that, you know, been more aware of it, basically. And the dean saying, you know, I should have had more students consult with me on this, but, you know, it's my bad too. So it was an interesting solution because both parties got what they wanted, and neither party was portrayed as a bad guy. And the reason that makes a difference, the reason why that's such a good example of this is, you know, whichever way you feel about it, whether you like the protesters or you liked the dean, in this, neither were portrayed as a bad person. Both of them were ultimately working for the good of the students and wanting the best for everyone and trying to make a difference. And it's so accessible to everyone, that story, in what should have been a very that story itself should be very controversial. Everyone should be like, oh my gosh. you know, it has the potential to offend everybody, and yet, because of how he handled it, it offended nobody. It was an enjoyable story, and it really, you know, it's just one of those things that made comic books great, was that everyone could enjoy it. So, but nowadays, the political message becomes all important, and then all of a sudden, people who should, you know, like comic books, can't enjoy them because they're, the comic books are pushing an ideology that they may not agree with, or, yeah, well, that's basically it. They're just pushing an ideology that the person doesn't agree with, and it's not accessible to a lot of people who would normally enjoy these comics. And that, I think that's why this is really the biggest one right there. Forget your politics, forget your individual philosophies, your religion, whatever you want to add to it. Just forget about it and concentrate on telling a good story. And whatever you believe will still come out in your writing, but if you're subtle about it and you're nice about it, you can... your writing can be enjoyed by pretty much everyone who writes it, even if that person doesn't... everyone who reads it, I should say, even if that person, the person who reads it, doesn't personally agree with what you believe in. Or doesn't hold the same views, I should say. So I think that, more than anything else, that's what will save comic books. Is, you know, people basically creating good characters, writing good stories, and, you know, making them accessible to all people. And basically, yeah, the advice I gave is straight up how you do that. You start with either the story, the setting, or the character, and you build it up from there. And you don't just start with whatever message you want to send. And yeah, that's how to save comic books. That's really, I think, no matter who you are, no matter what you believe, I think that's probably the best way to save comic books. Anyway, that's my swinging in the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.